Impact. Real human interest stories ranging from the ordinary to the truly extraordinary.
Hello, this is Fatima Husain, and you're listening to Impact, the program which introduces you to extraordinary human interest stories from around Canada. Have you ever wondered what it's like living in a war zone? In this episode, we talk about Yemen, a Middle Eastern country that has long been making global headlines about its humanitarian crisis, perhaps the largest in the world. More than 24 million people, that's around 80% of Yemen's population, mostly children, are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. In light of the crisis, 2 Yemenis residing in Canada who've been directly affected come forward with what they've witnessed since the conflict first broke in 2015. Hamza Shaiban, president of the Yemeni Community in Canada, along with Yemeni Canadian Ahmed Al Mahdi, are trying to raise awareness about deaths, starvation, displacement, and destruction that can be avoided in Yemen.
My name is Ahmed Al Mahdi. I'm from Yemen. I came to Canada as a student in 2011. I went to school in Calgary. When the war started in 2015, I was always thinking about going back to see my family because it has been 4 years since I was there. But there was always that fear inside that makes me not thinking of going back. One, and the other reason is the airports are not always operating. So it's only the airports on the south side of Yemen. And going through that journey of going back to Yemen it's terrifying. About 2014, my dad went to a hospital. He was diagnosed with hepatitis C. That disease is curable if treated. But because of the lack of medical supplies in Yemen, lack of electricity in hospitals, for example. So my family, they had to go through all this. They know my dad wouldn't be able to get the medical treatment in Yemen. So what we did is we tried to contact a hospital in India. And I did that. I arranged an appointment for my dad, talked to the doctors. I sent them all the laboratory that were done in Yemen. So in 2015, about June 2015, that's when my dad was supposed to leave to India. However, the airport was bombed, and that was just 3 days before my dad's flight. So we had to rebook the flight, which was another month. So my dad's situation or his case was getting worse and worse with time. I would call him every day, and I knew he was going to die at any moment. But I felt hopeless. I couldn't do anything for him. The day before my dad passed away, I spoke to him, and he was like, "My son, I can't stand it anymore. I want to leave. I want to go to India to get medical help." And I wasn't expecting him to die that soon, but a week from his flight, he passed away. When the war broke out in 2015, that was close to finals, as I was a student at the University of Calgary. When the war started, I was shocked. I wasn't able to study. I wasn't able to focus. I ended up deferring some of my exams. I would call my family, and they would be in fear. They would lie to me that they're fine, but I know they were not fine. I can tell that from their voices, that they're not. They're scared because there were bombs all over the place. People were terrified. My family was terrified. When I talked to my younger brothers, they wouldn't lie, or they wouldn't tell me they're fine. They'll be honest. They're like, we might not live to the next day, because bombs were not targeting only military areas. They were targeting hospitals, schools, markets. A lot of civilians were dead because of that. So my family were not feeling safe because they could be the next victims. My family always, they tell me, I want to leave. We want to leave this country. We can't stand it anymore. But I feel hopeless. I can't help them. What I saw firsthand when I went back to Yemen in 2017 was quite shocking, very devastating. It's completely different to what you see in the news or what you see in TV. First thing is when you land into Yemen, it's not the country I'm used to. it's completely different. Just the moment you step out of the airport, you kind of notice it's a devastated country. Buildings are destroyed. Kids are homeless. What I saw was quite shocking. I saw kids searching for food in garbage bins, and it's not one, it's not two, it's too many. A lot of them are searching for food. There were big lineups for water. Kids and families, there's a lack of water in Yemen. There's a lack of clean water. It was one time when I was sitting with friends at home, and all of a sudden there was an airstrike. The windows were shattered in my house. People kind of they cope with it. There's no reaction. They're numb to it because it's an everyday thing for them. But for me, it was quite shocking. But you can see the kids crying in fear and terror. They're shocked. Kids can't cope with that. Every time there's an airstrike, kids run around. They don't know where to hide. They would think they would be targeted or they would be killed from that airstrike. And I saw kids running from school, hundreds of kids running out from school when they heard about the bomb. And they were all crying. Feel hopeless. You can't help them. You can't do anything for them. And I had this conversation with this kid, and I asked him about, what do you want to be in the future? And he said, I would be a doctor, but if I live, because I could die at any moment. And hearing these words from an 8-year-old kid, they're quite moving and touching. Feel nothing. You have nothing but to cry or feel sad for that. What shocked me the most is a visit to the cemetery. It was a brand new cemetery. It was only 3 years old cemetery. It was made specifically for those who died as a direct impact of the war. And I stepped into the cemetery and I started reading names. I was quite shocked because I could remember a lot of them. I could remember my high school friends. I could remember relatives, friends. I started counting how many people I know in the cemetery. It was a very huge cemetery, hundreds if not thousands of dead bodies there. And I started counting 1, 2, 20, 30 that I know personally. After 30, I couldn't count anymore. I just cried.
My name is Hamza Shaiban and I'm the president of the Yemeni Community in Canada. My journey started in 2011 when I moved to Canada as a student to finish my higher education. Towards the end of 2017, I figured that there isn't much coverage around Yemen or what's happening in Yemen, the war crimes committed in Yemen. And so that's when I felt that there is a need for someone to speak up and let Canadians know about what's really happening in Yemen. Speaking of the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, which is one aspect of the crisis that is happening in Yemen right now, but we're talking about the worst humanitarian crisis in the past 100 years, according to the UN. The population of Yemen is almost 28 million. Out of that, 22.2 million, which is almost 70% of the population, they need some sort of humanitarian assistance. 16 million of them lack access to drinking clear and purified water, and this explains why we have the worst cholera outbreak in the history of this planet. UN, just a couple of months ago, they released a report saying that by the end of this year, almost 250,000 people will be dead in Yemen because they don't have access to food. And the sad part about it is that there is literally almost no coverage about Yemen. If you remember the war in Syria that started in 2011, the whole world was talking about Syria. And I can assure you that whatever happened in Syria is not even 30% of what happened in Yemen. Yet no media coverage, no government is talking about it. I still have my family back in Yemen. But I've lost a lot of my friends that I grew up with because of this war. I've lost 4 of my cousins, my own cousins of this war. I've known people who have been kidnapped, tortured. Let me just give you one example of that. I know this guy, he's a doctor in the university. He had to leave the country to attend a conference. And on his way back, he was kidnapped. And this happened back in 2016. A year later, obviously no one could reach to him. He wasn't allowed to speak to his family. He wasn't allowed to be visited or anything of that sort. A year later, his son died in a car accident. And I know his son very well. We used to go to the same high school. He died in a car accident. And since then, he hasn't been informed that his son died. His family could not reach out to him to speak to him. So imagine this guy coming out of prison after 3 years and knowing that he lost a son and he never knew about it. One of the reasons that I stopped using social media personally is because every time that I used to log into my Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, a I'll always find out that I've lost one of my friends or a neighbor or someone that I know. It was very hard for me to just live like a normal person here, knowing that anything could happen to my family at any second. I could be receiving a phone call right now saying that, oh, you've lost your brother, your sister, or your mother, or your father. Sad to reach to a point where you're not even sure whether your family could be alive tomorrow or not. So I visited Yemen since the war started 2 times, one time in 2016 and the other one in 2018. One thing that I'll never forget is that when I was leaving, so for you to get to Sana'a, the capital city, I had to go to the south of Yemen, which is Aden, and then take a bus. I had to go to Sayoun, which is another city in the south, and then take a bus for almost 24 hours. On my way back to Canada, I remember we reached this city and then the bus driver just stopped and he said, okay, please, you're not allowed to use your phone, you're not allowed to use any lights inside the bus. We're about to enter an area where if jets spotted anything moving, they will just bomb us. And so I was on the bus for almost 4 hours, complete darkness around you. You can't see anything. All you can hear is the motor of the bus just blowing your ears. And you're just waiting there for the jets to bomb you. For 4 hours, you're just waiting for anything. And anything could happen in that 4 hours. Like, they could just bomb you. And then the thing is that if that happened, no one would say anything. No one would talk about it. It's not like, if something happened in London or in New York or in California, the whole world will be talking about it. But in Yemen, like, literally war crimes are committed on hourly basis and no one is talking about it. So that's one thing that I'll never forget, which is like just waiting for death. I was traumatized just by looking at the city that I grew up in, watching it being destroyed. Buildings, bridges, roads, schools, hospitals, literally everything was bombed in the city. I'll never forget the pictures and the videos that was sent to me by a team that I'm working with in Yemen to help poor people. There is this city in Hodeidah called Aslam. In this city, literally people don't have anything to eat. It's to a point where they ran out of tree leaves that they used to eat for months and months to survive. And I still remember a story of this man who took his son and he was running to the nearest medical center, which took him almost 3 hours to walk to reach that center. And when he arrived, the child died. And the doctors just told him, we can't do anything about it. Just take him back and bury him. There isn't anything that we can do about it right now. Just seeing the father carrying his son with eyes full of tears, it was heartbreaking. And the problem is that there's nothing you can do to help them. There is nothing that could be done by you or by anyone else. When the war started, it was very hard for me to take it and just live with it. The sad part about it is that as time passes, it became something normal in my life. News would be the first thing I'd read when I open my eyes and it would be the last thing that I read before I sleep. In the beginning, it was very hard. I was very scared that anything could happen to my family, but then I just adapted to this new situation and I'm living with it right now. It's scary because as a normal human being, you shouldn't be living knowing that at any point I could lose my family. So the war right now is in 5th year, in terms of governments or the UN intervening to stop this war. It's almost not happening. Canada has always had this picture of being a very peaceful country and that always promotes for peace. And now I find it really hard when I talk to people back home because they would always ask me, why is Canada not saying anything? Why Canada was always talking about Syria and they always try to help the Syrian people. And I'm not asking Canada here to do the same thing and allow refugees to come to Canada from Yemen. That's certainly not something that I would be asking for. But at least the Canadian government should be talking more about this war. It should be mentioned more in the media.
It's quite devastating. It's quite shocking. In addition to the people that died, you could see people that lost their arms, the others lost their legs. Some people can't see. Some people are deaf because of bombs every day. Can't hear anymore. It's quite shocking when you see and compare it to what people do in Canada. It's a completely different world. You can see kids here go to school, they play in playgrounds, they go to schools, they play with their families. But in Yemen, it's a different world. Kids are either searching for food in the garbage, kids are either working in the streets or begging for food. It's hard to see a kid playing. Almost every Yemeni in Canada is affected by the war, some way or another. people that they know. If it is not part of their family that is affected, at least their neighbors, at least people they know, people they go to school with. So almost everybody is affected by the war. No exception here. The reason I think Canadians or Torontonians should know about Yemen is because of the world we live in now is very influenced by what happens in social media. So social media could impact decision makers. They could influence people in power to bring parties involved in the war into peace talks. They could find resolution for what's happening in Yemen. They would be able to say enough for the war, time for peace talks. And it has happened, but it's quite not serious so far. So the more people speak about it, the more not only Canadians, the more everybody around the world speak about it. It's kind of pushing the UN and governments towards bringing peace to the Yemenis. All they're asking for is to live in peace. All they need is electricity, water, and safe place, and safe home. And that's all they're asking for. Here, what people are looking for is they want to go to school, they're searching for jobs, and they think about what's their new iPhone or what's their new Android. But in Yemen, what people think about, it's different. What they think about is how to get our next meal. They're not secure about their next meal. Where is it coming from? How am I going to feed my kids? People don't think about going to school anymore. They think about how to find water, how to find electricity. People have been living in the dark for 4 years. No electricity in Yemen. Only those who can afford solar panels have electricity. But most Yemenis don't. Most Yemenis are poor. Well, actually, more than 70% of Yemenis are not secure. Well, they lack food security. But here in Canada, what we think about financial security. Yemen is not about financial security. It's about food security. It's about water. How do we get water? It's not about how to get the latest car, new laptop. It's about how to get food. It's about how to be safe and live to the next day.
That was Hamza Shaiban and Ahmed Al Mahdi sharing their experiences of the humanitarian crisis in Yemen. And before we leave, we'd like to extend our thanks to Hamza and Ahmed and VX3 Exchange.
Impact is a production of VX3 Exchange, featuring the stories of extraordinary people, sharing their stories again and again at vx3exchange.com or our social platforms at VX3 Exchange.